So just wonder then if we can take some readings from the Gospel of Matthew and then one from the Gospel of John, beginning with Matthew and chapter 4. We'll read from the Gospel of Matthew and chapter 4, and there we'll read from verse 23. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 23, and there we read this. And Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing all manner of sickness and all manner of disease among the people. And his fame went throughout all Syria. And they brought unto him all sick people that were taken with divers diseases and torments, and those which were possessed with devils, and those which were lunatic, and those that had the palsy. And he healed them. And then Matthew in chapter 8. Matthew in chapter 8, and there we'll read from verse 14. And when Jesus was come into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laid and sick of a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and ministered unto them. When the evening was come, they brought unto him many that were possessed with devils, and he cast out the spirits with his word, and healed all that were sick. And then, latterly, to Matthew in chapter 12. Matthew in chapter 12, and there we'll read at verse 14. Then the Pharisees went out and held a council against him, how they might destroy him. But when Jesus knew it, he withdrew himself from thence, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. And then we'll go across to John in chapter 20. John chapter 20, and then we'll read just from verse 30. John chapter 20 and verse 30, and there we read this. And many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written, that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name. We trust the Lord will bless to us this evening the reading of his holy word. You know, I just like to think of this evening, as I was considering what to take up, I was thinking about all those occasions where we read, and it's a few quiet words here, and just a few sentences there, and yet such a massive impact is had. When many came to the Lord Jesus Christ with many issues, many problems, many sicknesses, and we just simply read, he healed them all. You know, it's interesting to think and humbling to think that a majority of people healed by the Lord Jesus not only remain nameless, and even those we read of, many of them remain nameless. But you know, many of them, most of them perhaps, were unrecorded for us in the scriptures, as we read John's declaration there that the Lord did many things beside. Even in obscurity, it would be difficult to imagine the compassion and love of the Lord Jesus Christ, and not being desirous to help and to heal and to bless. But we read of these miracles performed in the scriptures with this purpose, that we might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and believing that we might have life through his name. You know, the wonderful thing is, these people, they had many problems, some of them listed. Different medical conditions, different spiritual conditions, different social conditions and societal conditions, but yet the solution was the same. And the one solution they needed was the Lord Jesus Christ. You know, anyone who works in a clinical field, one of the main things you have to know and have to do is know when you're not appropriate to be the person who helps the person that's in front of you. You know, if you went to a physiotherapist with an issue that was better solved by a doctor, then they would be best to tell you and would have a diligence to tell you that they couldn't help. Likewise, if you went to a doctor and you had an issue that required restorative exercise, then they would have to tell you to go to a specialist because they wouldn't be equipped to give you the advice that you needed. And yet all of these people with different conditions, different problems, different needs. And the only person they needed to come to was the Lord Jesus Christ. He was their solution. And he can be ours today. And I'd just like to think in the time we have left of three similarities, despite the diversity of all these conditions. Despite the diversity of the people that came to him, the regions they were in. They came from Syria, and we read of them coming from Jerusalem. We read of people coming in various areas and towns and highways and byways. But the one thing they had in common was the person they came to. And I'd like to just consider this evening three similarities between all of these cases, the details of which we don't read. And the first of them is this, that they came in their need. You know, in all of the passages we've read, and the Lord Jesus Christ was in different circumstances, in different times, in different places. We read of just after he'd healed in the temple, and the Pharisees tried to plot against him, to kill him, for not obeying their laws of the day. And yet those who needed the Lord Jesus Christ, who needed healing, they came to him and were healed. We read of just after the Lord had healed Peter's mother-in-law in that house. We read that those who came afterwards with diverse needs, they came to him and he healed them. There were those who had physical problems. There were those possessed of devils. There were those who had various issues for different lengths of time. But the outcome was the same. They were healed. And the first of these three similarities is just that they came in their need. You know, if it was the case of traveling far across, and in those days there were no planes, trains and cars, if it was walking a great distance or being carried a great distance, many of these people, perhaps even those who are possessed of devils being dragged a long distance against their will, in their best interests to come to the Lord Jesus, if there was a local thing that could help, if there was a quick solution that would be effective in helping them with their issue, then surely they would have pursued that first. But you know, they came to him in their need, and they were helpless, and they were hopeless, and yet they came to one who could help. And when we think of their need, I love these recountings of the Lord Jesus Christ healing those in hopeless and helpless situations, because it speaks so clearly of us in our sin. Because before God we are, as the scriptures would describe, dead in trespasses and sin. You know, we like to think, and it's poetic to think of a sin-sick world, but the scriptures tell us dead in trespasses and sin. We like to think of things that we can do and ways that these issues can be resolved. We like to think of cases that haven't yet been presented, of lives that haven't been complete, and yet the scriptures tell us condemned already. You know, there's nothing incomplete about the guilt of mankind before the holy and righteous God. What defines sickness? How did these people know that there was anything wrong with them? Well, it's this, simply, that they couldn't do what they were meant to do. That they weren't capable of being what they were meant to be. That they didn't have what they were meant to have. You know, the problem of sin, it meets us in exactly the same way. God created in the Garden of Eden a perfect world. And he created mankind that he might have a relationship with them, and that he might have worship from them, and that he might give gifts to them. And what does mankind do? Well, they ruin the relationship that they had with God by sin. By departing from the way that God had prescribed. And there were consequences to that sin. They were put out of the garden. The world in which we live, the perfection that was, no longer is. And their situation changed. Because the God who was their father, their keeper, and their friend, because of his righteousness and his justice, that God became their judge. And when we think upon the needs of mankind, it's easy to look back at a state that we never occupied, and look back at people we've never met and see their faults. But I tell you, the scriptures bring it bang up to date by telling us that we all have sinned. That there is iniquity in each and every one. We read in the epistle of John that if any says he has not sinned, he makes God a liar. And what a serious thing to do. to think that we can assert our innocence before the God of heaven. You know, anyone who's lived much life at all, I'm sure we've all gotten away with things that were our fault. Being the youngest of 8 siblings, it was not an uncommon thing that I was responsible for something, and I would, play my cuteness card, which has long since expired, and go to my mum and be upset and say they'd been picking on me and it wasn't my fault, and they'd be punished and I'd be fine. But there's none of that with the God of heaven. No deceiving the God of heaven to attest our innocence. No passing the judgment onto another by deceit or by false witness. But the scriptures call all attempts at that sin. To bear false witness. The very depth of sin, the very seed of sin is the first sin we read. To have no other gods before the God of heaven. And it's a sin that is rampant and rife in the world in which we live today. To place importance upon anything superior to the importance we place upon a relationship with the God of heaven. Any other sin you might want to deny, but that sin nobody can ever say they've never committed. And God must judge sin. And the wages of sin, the consequence of sin is death and separation from him. Eternal suffering in hell and in the lake of fire. And we've all sinned. And with sin comes judgment. In worldly terms, we might be able to avoid the judgment we deserve, but with the eye of God, which sees all things. We read that God sees not as man sees, for man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. There are things you've never said that God knows you thought. There are things you've never done that God knows that you've thought upon. There are things no one's seen you do that God knows that you're guilty of. And it's that God before whom we stand in judgment. And it places us just as the sickest of those on the brink of certain death brought before the Lord Jesus Christ. So helpless are we in our sin. But the wonderful thing is they came in their need. And that is the purpose of the gospel message, that in our need we don't have to be abandoned, but we come to him. And it's a wonderful thing in this world to be able to help people. It happens quite often. People come with their problems, especially when you're in a clinic, and they'll come and they'll say, I've got this problem, and you've seen it 100 times before, but they're experiencing it for the first time, and they feel like nothing can help. God is over and above the greatest physician this world has ever known. And if we come to him in our need, we didn't read the circumstances of the people because it didn't matter. We didn't read where they came from. We didn't read how much money they had. We didn't read what family they belonged to. We didn't read what sin they'd committed or how they'd lived their life that might have brought them to the condition they were in. All we read is that they came to the Lord Jesus Christ in their need. And in the context of the gospel, that's all that matters. What mattered to them is that they acknowledged that they were sick and they came to one who could help. And with the context of the gospel in view, that's all that we can do as well. We have to acknowledge that we're sinful, that we're bound for God's judgment, that we're deserving of it, and to come to him in our need. And that is just the second similarity between all these people. They came to him, and that is the difference. They could have gone to anyone else in the world and they wouldn't have been able to help. There are conditions even in this modern age where we like to think we stand on the precipice of all knowledge that has ever existed, on the shoulders of every intellectual that has ever walked the earth, and there are conditions in the world today that none can heal or help. But there's no problem beyond the power and ability of God. And that's the wonderful thing. They came to him. There were those possessed of devils. There were those unable to walk, carried by those who cared for them. Those blind who moved their way blindly toward him. But the Lord Jesus Christ, he was able to save them. He was willing to save them. Two remarkable facts that we can't afford to overlook. that the Lord Jesus Christ, despite all that he had to do, if the Lord Jesus Christ came and in a day went to the cross to die for your sin and for mine, that would have been more than we could ever have deserved, more than mankind could ever have asked for. And yet out of millions of people, these few with their few needs, outcast by society, came to him and he cared enough to stop and to stoop down to help them. When there were those who wanted to kill him, he found time to heal those who needed him. When there was one he'd already healed and showed the glory of God, he found time to make a difference to the lives of those who came to him afterward. And the Lord Jesus Christ, he came into this world. We read that he came, he was made manifest in these last times for us. He is the God of heaven, the eternal one. We read in the scriptures that his goings forth were from everlasting, that he came into the world, but he didn't come into existence. And that eternal God would enter into this world that mankind has ruined. And he was born a myriad of years ago in Bethlehem. And the Lord Jesus Christ came into the world. And in utter humility, in poverty the likes of which is unseen in this developed world, in this developed nation, the Lord Jesus Christ would be wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger. It would be said of him that he had not where to lay his head. And he would leave the splendor and the glory of heaven to come into this world, to be held by human hands who created them. And the Lord Jesus Christ, he was born into this world with a purpose. He said of himself, I have come that you might have life, and that you might have it more abundantly. You know, that summary would have encompassed all of those people that were healed. They came, some to be rid of the demons they were possessed by, some to be given the mobility they lacked, some to be given the sight or the senses that they had never received. But they all came that the life that they had might be lived with a greater joy, with greater capacity, with greater blessing because of what the Lord Jesus Christ had done for them. You know, in that spotless, perfect life where he healed and helped and blessed those whose society would have moved past and left in the dust. As he moved and lived a perfect life. You know, there are people in this world that die despite the fact that cures to their conditions exist because it is not profitable to help those with nothing. And yet, the Lord Jesus Christ, there was nobody whom he didn't value enough to give time, to give care for, because he came into the world for them. And the perfect life that he lived, it was crowned, it culminated in the sacrificial death that he died. It was laid out as a perfect plan. It wasn't just something that he found for his hand to do, but his intention in the world was this, that he might show the love of God and that he might satisfy God's justice. And there on the cross of Calvary, we read how it was said that as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. What was the purpose of the serpent in the wilderness? Well, it was that those who were sick, those who were dying, could look at it and be healed and live. And the purpose of the death of the Lord Jesus Christ was the same. That God would put him to grief. That God would punish his Son. That those who didn't deserve it, those who couldn't afford it, those who couldn't pay for it, might live. You ever thought what a sinful mind would do with the ability to heal all manner of diseases? I tell you, they'd be wealthy above all else. They would use their time to heal those who could give them the most, and they would have all the good things the world could offer, yet the perfect Son of God, he healed out of love and kindness and grace. And we thank God that the gospel is on the same basis. Because it is not what we can give to God, because nothing we have is of any value to him. But his intention, his desire, his care is for what he can give to us. And the Lord Jesus Christ, having satisfied God's judgment on the cross of Calvary in 3 dark hours where God would judge his Son for the guilt of the world, the Lord Jesus Christ would die. He would give his life. And he'd be raised again to show that death would have no power over him. What a privilege we have that there was a God who loved us enough that despite what we deserve, he would give us what we could never achieve. You know, these people, they might not have had these issues because of their own case. You know, that's a solemn thing, to see somebody with a condition, to see somebody suffering in a way that doesn't seem deserving of the things that they've done. But the problem of sin, we all deserve the suffering that's before us. We all deserve the judgment that God has in store for those who don't believe on his Son. But God in his mercy offers us a way of salvation. And the third similarity we read of all these people with their different conditions from their different places is this, that they came in faith. You know, we don't read a measure of the faith that they had. It wasn't queue up from those who believed the most to those who believed the least. All that they did was placed what they had into the hands of the Lord Jesus Christ. And you know, those few words, he healed them all. It means that not one single person came to him in hope of help and didn't receive it. Not one single person with the simple faith to present themselves to him was counted unbelieving enough to receive the kindness of God. It was said of Christ in the scriptures, by himself, that those who come to him, he will in no wise cast out. Those who come to the Father through him will in no wise be rejected. The wonderful message about the gospel is this: nobody has come to God for salvation in faith and been rejected. You know, these people, they could have done otherwise with their lives, couldn't they? They might have had this condition that they thought would end their life imminently. And it is an interesting thing to see what people do when they know that their life is coming to an end. And they could have gone to enjoy the things of the world. They could have gone to spend their time with people that they would have rather be around. They could have gone to the furthest reaches of the globe that they could ever have reached. But they came to Christ and they were healed. You know, the sad thing about the gospel is this: that the world is full of people that desperately need it. The world is full of people who can't survive without it. And just as foolish as these people would have been to use their waning, wavering strength to go further away from the solution to their problem, the world goes on outside. You know, just as the world could not contain the books of the deeds of the Lord Jesus Christ, if people truly understood what he could do for them, this building would scarcely contain those who wanted to hear of him. And they came to the Lord Jesus Christ, not with what they had, not with what they were helpless, they were powerless, but this change that was made in them, the blessing that they received, it was effortless. The Lord Jesus Christ made the difference. The Lord Jesus Christ made the change. It's not they were healed, not they healed himself, not they worked together. He healed them. And such is the message of the gospel. There is nothing you can do to bring you closer to God. Nothing you can give to make you more worthy to God. But Christ has already done the work. Christ has all the ability. All you have to do, all you can do, is come to him. You know, with the physical healing of their bodies, there perhaps would have been those who were incapable of coming to where the Lord Jesus Christ was. And we read in the scriptures of those too sick to make the journey, healed at a distance by the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ. And we're blessed in the world in which we live today. And there are religions who will tell you about pilgrimages you have to make, which excludes those who can't afford it or who can't make the journey from being blessed by the God that they propose to serve. But the God of heaven, he doesn't require your ability. He doesn't require your wealth. He doesn't require your utter ability to please him. All he requires is you to come to him in your need, knowledgeable about your sin, and to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. You know, I take comfort in the fact that there was none who didn't believe enough. Those who came were healed. And the message of the gospel is the same. Those who come will be saved. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. Not believe this much, not change this much. Come to him in faith, and he can and will save those who come unto God through him. You know, it's a wonderful thing that a multitude of people came, countless multitudes. And they came to the Lord Jesus in their need. They would have asked him in different ways. Many may not have even been able to speak at all, and he healed them. You know, it can be the same for the world today. In different languages, with the ability, audibly or silently, to come in faith to God through his Son, the world could be forgiven. They could be saved from their sin, from the judgment before them. They could be saved because of the same thing that these people were saved by. To come to Christ, to come in their need, and to come in faith that the Lord Jesus Christ can and will, is able and willing to save all those who believe on his name.